Welcome back to the channel. It's Big Chris. I've still got that big receding hairline, and today we are joined by a special guest, Cold Sore. Unfortunately, but I live in the real world, we can't do anything about it. So in this video and the cold sore, we are going to be looking at one of the creepiest things that's still out there today, and that is human corpses that you can still visit today. So let me just give you some context. Around the world, there are famous human bodies that have been embalmed and preserved for longevity, and you can still visit them today. So in this video, I'm going to go through the list of embalmed, preserved people, and maybe one day you might jet off on a plane and go and see one or two of these people. So here we are. This is the list of famous, preserved people from around the world. So up first on our creepy list of dead corpses is Vladimir Lenin. So Lenin's body was taken to Red Square and put on display shortly after his death in 1924. It is remarkably unchanged because of the preservative methods that were used on his corpse. Now, Lenin, he had black imperfections all over his body. And to treat these imperfections, they had a mixture of both acidic acid and vodka that was wiped onto his skin. Now, under the Soviet Union, the government paid members of staff to continually preserve his body. Now, when Joseph Stalin dies in 1953, his embalmed body was placed next to Lenin's body, and it remained on display for 8 years until it was removed in an effort in what we know as de-Stalinization of the whole country. Now, Lenin's body is still on display in Red Square today, and you can go and visit it right now. Up next, I have a 2-for-1 deal. We have Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. So the bodies of North Korean founder Kim Il-sung and his son and heir Kim Jong-il are on permanent display at the Kumsusan Palace in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. Their embalmed corpses rest in glass coffins in separate halls, and each body has a dim red light shining on the bodies to give their skin a redder complexion. Now, in the corners of these rooms, you have armed soldiers, and they are looking after the bodies, but they're also making sure that a nice stream of visitors can see the two bodies as well. But there are strict codes. You must bow 3 times in front of both leaders. Kim Il-sung, he dies in 1994, but he remains the eternal president of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So even though he's passed away, he still holds that position. And also his son, Kim Jong-il, who died in 2011, is the eternal general secretary of the ruling Workers' Party. Now, both men, they suffered heart attacks. And the Russians, they sent scientists into North Korea to help embalm both of the bodies. And they also maintained them even to this day. Up next, we have Ho Chi Minh. So Ho Chi Minh was one of Vietnam's most respected leaders, and he led the Viet Minh independence movement, and he served as his country's prime minister. Now, Minh, he died of heart failure in 1969, and he has an enormous mausoleum constructed in his home city of Hanoi. Now, inside, his body remains on display, as many of the other world communist leaders have also done. After his death, the capital was renamed to Ho Chi Minh City, and today the Vietnamese government works hard to maintain his preserved image as the father of Vietnamese independence. So an example of this is how important he looks in front of the world stage. So Ho Chi Minh, he might have had many relationships with women, but you are not allowed to talk about that. It's all hush hush. We need to make sure that his name is preserved so that when you go and visit, he looks like the shining great leader that he was. Up next, we have Mao Zedong. So Mao Zedong was the leader of the Communist Party of China, and he served as its chairman for nearly 30 years. He is certainly a controversial figure that is often compared to Stalin and Hitler. Now, whilst Mao's huge contribution to the creation of a unified, modernised China, the lengths of which he took to get that and to achieve his goals are undoubtedly brutal. His body remains on display for 1 week after his death. It was then encased in a crystal coffin and moved permanently to his mausoleum, which was built at the Tiananmen Square. It is guarded by heavily armed military personnel, but remains a popular tourist destination even to this day. So Hugo Chavez was Venezuela's controversial socialist president who died in 2013. Now, in the fashion of his socialist and communist predecessors, Chavez was supposed to be embalmed so that his followers could view his body on a permanent basis. But unfortunately, there were complications involving the process, and his body was not prepared quickly enough. For a body to be successfully preserved, the embalming process must begin within hours of the body dying. So further to this, with the warm Venezuelan climate, this made preserving the corpse even more difficult. Still, it was possible, and it is still possible today, to go to the military academy in the city of Caracas, and you can visit his body today. So up next, I have a really sad one for you. This is Mummy Juanita. So Mummy Juanita, she has many nicknames. She's known as the Inca Ice Maiden and also the Ice Princess. Now, it is evident with the signs of head trauma to her skull and the location of her body at the top of Mount Ampato in the Peruvian Andes that she was a child sacrifice. Now, experts believe she was around 12 years old at her death, which occurred more than 500 years ago. The freezing temperatures naturally mummified her, and she was extraordinarily well preserved, giving anthropologists and scientists a rare insight into Inca life. Today, you can visit her body at the Catholic University's Museum of Andean Sanctuaries in Peru. One of the greatest military generals of all humanity, Napoleon Bonaparte. Throughout history, dead rulers have been preserved with fantastic generosity and consideration for their legendary personas during life. And it is no surprise that Napoleon Bonaparte would follow suit. Now, after much speculation surrounding his death, scientists have confirmed that Napoleon died of a malignant stomach tumour. So 2 days after his death, a cast was taken of Napoleon's head, and it was placed in a tin coffin with 3 outer shells made of wood, lead and mahogany. Now, some years later, the coffins were placed in a sarcophagus and then put on display at the Les Invalides in a marble hall that is open to the public and which you can go and visit. Ferdinand Marcos. So Ferdinand Marcos was a Filipino president turned dictator that ruled the country between 1965 and 1986. His regime was riddled with cruelty, extravagance, and was notoriously corrupt. Now, Marcos died in exile, and his body was kept in a refrigerated mausoleum in Hawaii until 2001, when it was finally returned to the Philippines. His wife, Imelda, she refused to have him buried without military honours, but the citizens heatedly protested any plans to have him buried in the Filipino soil. Thus, his body remains on display in a glass coffin at the Marcos family mausoleum in the village of Bacas in the Philippines. We have our very first saint on this list, Saint Bernadette. So Saint Bernadette was a French girl of humble origins that bore witness to apparitions of Mary, the mother of Jesus, Our Lady of Lourdes. Now, following her death, religious members of her community, as well as 2 doctors, observed her body appear incorrupt from any kind of decomposition. This was regarded as a miracle and ultimately contributed to her canonization. Now, eventually, a wax cast of her head and hands were superimposed over her real hands and face, which were beginning to start to decay. The body was then placed in a crystal coffin and remains on display at the chapel of Saint Bernadette in Neves in France. This is Lady Di. She's also known as Xin Su, and she was the wife of the Marquis of Dai Li Shang during the Han dynasty. She is better known as Lady Di, and she gained notoriety more than 2,000 years after her death, when her tomb was discovered in a hillside in 1971. When workers opened up her tomb, they found a remarkably preserved body. Her skin, it hadn't decayed, and the muscles and the tendons were still malleable enough for the joints to be flexed. Now, along with Mummy Juanita, Lady Di is considered to be one of archaeologists' greatest discoveries of the 20th century. And today, her remains are located at the Hunan Province Museum. And you can go and see it today. Let me now introduce you to King Tutankhamun. Probably one of the most iconic preserved human corpses available out there is King Tut. Now, his body was discovered in 1922, and inside there were many gold items and treasures. Now, the unearthing of King Tut's tomb spawned a wave of renewed interest in ancient Egypt. Now, King Tut's mask has become a popular symbol of all of ancient Egypt, and it has enormously impacted popular culture ever since. Now, King Tut himself was actually a very sick boy, and we estimate he died at around 18. And his body is currently on display in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. Now, there are many funerary items that are on circulation, not just in Egypt, but around the world and their museums. So you might be able to see a little bit of King Tut in your local museum. And if not, go and see the king himself. He's still there at the Valley of the Kings. Rosalia Lombardo. She is commonly nicknamed Sleeping Beauty. And this is because Rosalia, she sadly passed away as a toddler of pneumonia when she was 2 years old. And her father, who was a wealthy official in her hometown of Palermo, he was so heartbroken that he had her body embalmed and preserved. Now, she is extremely well preserved, and all of her organs are still intact, but her body is starting to show decolorization. Now, due to an optical illusion which involves the way that the lights filter into her glass coffin, many have said that they've observed her blinking as her eyes open and shut. Now, the body is located in the Capuchin catacombs in Palermo, where you can visit as part of a guided tour of the catacombs. This is Otzi the Iceman. So Otzi the Iceman is a mummy that is estimated to have died around 3300 BC. He was found in the Otzo Alps on the border between Italy and Austria. He is the oldest natural mummy ever found in Europe, and he offers remarkable insight into the lives of these early people. Now, interestingly, he has over 61 tattoos all over his body. Now, some theorise that these tattoos are part of some kind of healing technique, maybe like acupuncture. Now, either way, it is certain that Otzi is the oldest tattooed mummy known to man, and his body is located at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology, and you can go and see him today. This is Jeremy Bentham. So Jeremy Bentham is the famed English philosopher and social reformer. And he is most well known for his work in the gender equality, animal rights, law reform and economy during the 18th and 19th century. Now Bentham, he requested in his will that when he dies, his body could be used as part of a dissection demonstration in an autopsy lecture. Now after the dissection, he asked that his remains were preserved as part of an auto icon. His preserved body is still on display at the University College of London, and the body is situated in a wooden cabinet, and he is propped up in a chair wearing his own clothes. And finally, we have Eva Peron, Argentina's emblematic First Lady of the 1940s and 50s. She was embalmed when she died of cancer in 1952 at the age of 33. She was known as Evita, and she was adored by her husband's poor and working class base, as she was reviled by the military and the elites. Now, after Juan Peron was toppled in a coup in 1955, the army officials secretly removed Evita's corpse from its resting place at the pro-Peron trade union headquarters. Now, worried that pro-Peron militants would find the body, the new dictator had the body taken to Italy and buried in Milan under a false name. Now, Peron's third wife and successor, Isabel, finally struck a deal, and Evita's body was returned to Argentina in 1974, and she has rested there ever since in the family mausoleum in Buenos Aires. So there we are, everybody. That is the list of crazy corpses that you can go and see today. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and once again, I'm Big Chris. I've still got that big receding hairline and sadly cold sore, but have an amazing day.